you'll settle back. I have almost 97 years worth of anecdotes to relate to you all. Spoiler alert, in keeping with the precedent established by Father, I'm going to honor her stature and try to keep it short. My mother used to write new letters and sign it, Frankie, and in parentheses, Mom to you. And that was amazingly appropriate in so many ways. Frankie was the luckiest person I've ever met. Those of you who golf with her, and I see quite a few of you, know that she got a hole-in-one. And luck is the only way to explain that. Her drives never went any higher than her shoulders. But still she managed. Late in life, when I would FaceTime her, she would lament how bad things were in the world. And I said, Mom, you lived through the worst period in history. You lived through the Great Depression, World War II, you know, the COVID pandemic. I mean, when I was in first grade, I had a kid in my class that was in a wheelchair because of polio. The President of the United States was in a wheelchair because of polio. Now that was a real epidemic. But you know, she had a different take on it. She said during the Great Depression, it was a great time to grow up. You know, nobody worried about kids playing on their lawn because people couldn't afford a lawn. You know, you didn't have helicopter parents. Well, primarily because the helicopter hadn't been invented yet. You know, you had so many people out of work that they would see little Johnny getting into mischief. And they would say, Johnny, I'm going to tell your mother. So it was a blissful childhood for her. And she loved her family, and what a family. She had 3 sisters and 3 brothers, and it was a collection of the most mirthful, humorous, and musical people you could ever imagine. And it was the most unlikely of families. Her father had very little formal education. They sent him to the mill to work at age 10. But he had kind of a spunk and a kind of entrepreneurial spirit. He built a little box, and for the breaks in the mill, he would sell candy and gum. And he saved his money, and eventually he was able to afford a store and real estate, and always drove a Cadillac in his later years. It was a kind of spirit that, you know, sort of illuminated her whole life. She was very proud of her professional life. This is her diploma for receiving a CPCU. She was one of the first women to receive this designation for people in the insurance industry, and she was an insurance adjuster. It's a real badge of honor. It's like a graduate degree in insurance, but she never went to college. So it was really quite a hard slog and a struggle for her, because she didn't just go from college to graduate school. She was in her 50s when she started. But that really was the way she was. She wanted to be recognized by her peers as the thorough professional that she was. And of course, you know, after the Great Depression, she was in her teen years during World War II. I said, well, Mom, you lived through World War II. She goes, oh, that wasn't so bad. As it turns out, she was kind of the belle of the ball. Her cousin was in the Marines, and those young men on Okinawa were kind of lonely hearts, so she was writing to 3 of them at one time, and I think they all thought they were going to marry her. Until they started comparing notes and showing the pictures. Well, she was busted. But after World War II, she was back working again. She was the bookkeeper for a movie theater, and which meant that she could see all the movies she wanted for free. And the owner of the theater's favorite movies was the Three Stooges. My mother hated the Three Stooges. But when I was growing up in her house, that was about as good as it got. We loved them. They were on every morning. There was kind of a circle of life going on there. But anyway, her life was mostly a love story. She worked in Manchester, New Hampshire. That's right. She was a Yankee. And since she came south and stayed, she was a darn Yankee. Well, she was always walked to work, which is at least a mile, usually a mile and a half, sometimes more. And that brought her by the Jenny gas station, and she happened to catch the eye, and he caught her eye, of this gas jockey who was really handsome. And after kind of a flirtation of looks and glances, one day he said, she stopped and talked to him and said, when are you going to buy me a Coke? So he thought that that was code for something that it really wasn't. But he bought her a Coke. And that started a 7-year courtship. 7 years. And any of you who knew Jack Sopel, my father, knew he was nothing if not persistent. And he saw her almost every day. And his dates at her house would end with her father saying, all those that have to go home, go home. All those that have to go to bed, go to bed. And he would kneel down and lead the family in prayer in French. My father often wondered if he had knelt down next to him, what would have happened, but he took the hit. Finally, he went out, they got married, and she had the most unique wedding that I've ever heard of. It was a big church wedding where she had a huge family, and she had she had 2 sisters, I should say, and she had no maid of honor, she had no bridesmaids, even though she was working at an insurance company that had 100 women employed there. She wanted the focus to be on her. So her wedding party was my father, his brother, his best man, and her. And we have a picture there, and it's a beautiful picture. Because I'm a classic movie buff, and I said, she looked just like Myrna Loy. She liked that. Well, it was a unique way to grow up because her father adored family. So when they got married, they lived in a large house. He made an apartment on the 2nd floor of that house. And they moved in. And when her sister got married, they made an apartment on the 3rd floor of that house. And that's where she moved in. So it was kind of like communal living way before the hippies. But it was, you always had family around you, and that made you the most secure people you could possibly imagine. And of course, I had mentioned that my mother's father would pray in French. Well, she was 7 years old before she spoke English. It was a very, close-knit French-Canadian family that she grew up in. And it was the house that we lived in was built in 1870, so it always required work, and they were modifying this and that, modifying that. And they had French-Canadian carpenters, and I was so inspired by the fact that my mother would laugh and joke in perfect French with her sisters that I copied their words and would say them back to my mother. Well, apparently, French-Canadian carpenters were not discussing philosophy and phraseology. My grandmother was white as a sheet when I was impressing her. It was kind of an unusual couple that Frank and Jackie were. My father grew up on the poor side of town. And he thought that, my mother living in this big house, just was like some kind of Rockefeller or something. But they were perfectly matched. Their marriage lasted 65 years and it only ended with my father's untimely death at 90. I say that she's the luckiest person I ever met because she was adored by Jack for 72 years. Adored. She always said that, well, whatever Jack wanted, because he always gave her exactly what she wanted. He had a genius for it. And really I think the only sad time in her life is the 5 years between when he had died and then when she got a chance to join him. I'm happy to say that she got her wish in the final days when her 3 sons were there. And we got to say goodbye to her in a proper way, when she could talk to us. She got dressed and joined us. It wasn't, she never had a long illness. She never had pain, except pain in her heart. And now she's reunited with my father, and their love affair goes on. I thank you all for coming here to celebrate her life.